Oh, and it begins with a slurp.
That's how I like to start things off.
That's how we always start things off, with a nice. Hang on, let me do it as well.
There we go. All in.
It's an unpleasant sound, but also a satisfying sound. It's a peculiar thing. Hello.
Yep. Hello. Welcome to the Diascast.
We've not missed a beat, clearly.
This is the usual sort of bullshit that you'd be familiar with.
We limp onto screen and kind of hope that we can get enough steam before we rock into the topics. How are you, Lloyd?
Speaking of rocking, I actually went to Electric Avenue, which is a real place,
Yes.
which I thought was not a real place. I thought that was like a metaphor. But I rocked on down to Electric Avenue. It's just like markets. That was
It's
it's like
markets, isn't
not
it?
particularly electric.
No, it isn't entirely electric. I'm sure there's some electric involved.
There's a big sign that's electric that says Electric Avenue, which
Electric
I was like,
Avenue,
cool.
yeah.
But then it's just like a market with veg.
There is veg. There is
veg and phone shops, and that was it.
Phone shops. How did you find? What was the best thing that you drank? What was the best thing that you ate whilst in London?
I ate a burger called the Dirty Secret in Maltby Market from the South African people. It's fucking great. It was a delicious burger, had a little pulled pork on top. It was like the kind of burger that you can't eat with your hands. They like dip the bun in like some sort of goo before, and then put it on your burger. Oh, that was very good. I had a bunch of very nice coffee. And I drank lots of beer, lots of London beer, I suppose. I don't know. They all
London beer?
Yeah. Loads of these, like, my friend is very into the craft beer thing.
Oh, okay.
We went to lots of bars with cool craft beers. So I drank a lot of that. Yeah, it was pretty nice overall. I don't know. It wasn't like, it wasn't mental. It was very calm, all in all, you know?
Yeah.
Like I'm no longer, or we are no longer at the age where we like go out and go mental in town, I suppose.
If you're going to go mental, don't go mental in London, because I mean, you'll feel it, but also your wallet will feel it. It's so
not cheap. Yeah,
so expensive.
I took out £80, thinking that'll do me for the weekend, and then I went to Maltby Market.
The weekend,
and I spent £40 on food and drink. I was like, "What happened there?"
Yeah.
Like my burger was £12. I'm like, okay, and like it's easy to forget, but like the pound is like still pretty strong. So I was like, oh, I spent like £100.
Yeah, it's So I didn't even think of that actually, about the conversion rate. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it is a lot more. The thing is about burgers that I am finding out more and more and more is that it's so difficult to eat them with a beard. I'm a messy eater anyway, like a really messy eater, even though I try not to be. Like I'll bite into a burger and the thing will explode and it will just go all over me. Yeah, so
the natural way of things. When your mustache gets to a certain length as well, you'll bite in and you'll bite some of your mustache, and then you'll be like, "Ow!"
Yes.
You know what's happening?
Oh my god,
not ideal.
Because you shaved your mustache off, didn't you?
I did. Yeah. Some time ago, because I got sick of doing that exact thing, which was eating my mustache instead of my food.
I remembered that. Yeah, but I have not done that.
No. Mustache watch.
Mustache watch is still here. Anyway, welcome to the Diascast. My name is Rob. I'm from the channel Performance Check. Despite the fact that I'm introducing this show on Lloyd's channel, I'm joined by Lloyd, who owns this channel. Say hi.
Hi.
Hi. And we have a very special guest with us on the Diascast. We have the wise man, the gentleman who descended from a tall mountain one day to grace us with his knowledge and his wisdom and his presence. It's Nicholas Dawson. Say hello.
Salvo.
All say that, which is even cooler. Fantastic. So, here on the Diascast, we're here to talk about all things role-playing games. And most of the time, our answers will be, it depends. So please bear with us. But we do have some topics we want to cover, and then we will be covering some questions from the Facebook group on Absolute Tabletop and some questions in the live chat. If you want to ask a question in the live chat, please put question in capital letters before it. So then we know that there's a question in the chat and it makes it easier to find. presuming people are watching. Maybe they're not. We will find out shortly. So what are the topics today?
So we have challenges, and if it's okay to simply let your PC succeed. This is something me and Nico talked about recently, not on stream, but just like if the players go out of their way to like remove all the obstacles, is it okay for you to just go, you did it? Or do you have to like still hammer home like 1d4 encounters or like a fight or whatever else? That's one thing. Thinking about mass combat, that came up recently in the group, so I thought we might chip in. And then Taylor asked a question the other day about names for things. We played in a session of Legend of the Five Rings, and Taylor had noticed that like everything had a different name. So you don't use a sword, you use a katana. You don't use a small sword, you use a wakizashi. Everything had a name, particularly the weapons and the gear and stuff like that, and how that like impacts a setting. Those are the three things.
Perfect. Let's start at the start then, which is, am I right in saying then, do you let players succeed in a challenge even though they fail the dice rolls, do you mean? Or
No. Like if if they have found a way to elude the dice rolls, like if they fix a problem before it happens, is it okay to just be like, okay, you've done it? Like, or do you have to throw in additional challenges or curveballs and stuff? Like in Nico's game, we were playing in Game of Thrones, we had like sorted out a way to basically avoid a fight. We had like marched down our huge army in force through this part of Dorne, and like gone through like pretty decent trouble. Like sent some letters and stuff like that, and that kind of thing. And then when we got there was no fight or encounter. It was just like fine, and we had done it. And there, like for me as a player, and like for Nico too, like the most satisfying thing on earth is when you do that in a game. Is when you like subvert the encounter and like just figure it out, you know. So the question is like, do you then, if the players do that and they figure out a way like around the problem, do you still have to, or do you think you should still like throw out an encounter or like a combat or something, even if they've like worked around it?
Oh, I see. Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, from your reaction, I can tell that you found it suitably rewarding in its own right, that you'd put the work in, so you'd manage to subvert that expectation. Nico, as you were running that game, then like, why don't you walk me through the exact example as well, just so I know how it is you were able to subvert it?
Basically, the characters had accrued a decent-sized army and marched at an unexpected route into a rebellious part of Dorne, and through a show of force and politicking, brought them maybe not back into the fold of Dorne, but certainly to heel and compliant with like the king's decrees, which is one of the characters in this case. And then with that in tow, they marched on to the capital, and that lent further weight to the diplomatic mission overall that they had in mind, which accelerated it, if anything. And there are very few challenges I could legitimately provide to that, which could not be like negotiated or one party appeasing the other to reach the resolution, which came at the end of the session. And so possible encounters that I'd planned didn't come to fruition, but it's still good to have those prepped in your mind, like anyway, even if like they don't come into use. I just had to improvise how I think things would fall into place, given the evidence before me as the GM, and not without use of like Deus Ex Machina that would either A, be cheesy, or B, is in reserve for later on in the campaign. There's no real way to like provide that, like Lloyd referenced, 1d4 expected encounters in a session. And so my thoughts on it over like more broadly would be that there's two factors, or as you'd say, Rob, it depends on the players and the contract of the game. If you think some or all of your players would enjoy the satisfaction of subverting encounters throughout a session, then why not do it? And if it's inherent in the contract of the game that like grand strategy or diplomacy or negotiation are part of the campaign, then those kinds of things from a player's perspective should be expected. Similarly, if the contract of the game is high action and balls to the walls for the next 3.5 hours, then I think maybe you are obliged to pull something out of the bag, or like force a conflict, challenge, or issue, whether by Deus Ex Machina or introducing new villains, or like whatever you have to do and can do by empowerment as the GM. I think like Rob asked straight up about like what is it to let the players succeed, that needs to be defined. I think to properly unpack. I think broadly you could reward the players and then consider the consequences if the encounters do end up being subverted, and then work on how the villains or foes react to that, which will throw up new challenges in the future. But obviously that won't provide any real use short term for the sake of that session. But they're things that I'd think about and do have to now think about for the weekend.
Because I had put up a post about Mir as well, about like when there's no legitimate challenge without being cheesy or without like pulling something out, like, oh, a huge army has appeared on your borders, or like, and like, where'd that come from? It doesn't make sense in world. And like, why did that happen? Is it just so the players have a challenge? That feels cheap and cheesy to me, and it like breaks my immersion when like a challenge just appears, you know, like
Same.
Especially if I've worked hard to like move around that challenge or like head that challenge or face it on whatever, then I deal with that, and then suddenly there's another thing, and it's like, well, where'd that come from? I had been working on this other thing and like dealing with that, and now suddenly there's another thing, and like, sure, that's like the nature of RPGs, but also it's like maybe okay to just be like, okay, you've done it for a while, have a breather, like, you know, take some time and figure it out. And that's what like, the last session of Mir was like. All of the conflict that happened there was, or most of it was like interpersonal, I guess. And there was no combat, almost no dice rolls in the last session. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I think like for me, it's the most rewarding thing that you can do as a player is like figure out what the problem is and then avoid having to fight. And even when I'm playing someone who likes to fight, like Marius, for example, like he loves killing people and battering monsters and stuff. But even for him, if I was able to like figure out a way to avoid, so it's different with him because he like his main mission is to like kill the bad guy, but there are other things that he wants to do, and if he could do those without fighting, I think he'd be really satisfied. And like that's the case in most campaigns that I play. If I can like avoid, or like, because it's just like a really satisfying piece of like you feel very crafty as a player when you're able to like circumvent those problems, I think.
Yeah, it's tactical thinking, I suppose, and when that's rewarded rather than just rolling a die and seeing if you hit or not, you know, I think something to be said of that. I think also though, even if say for an encounter, because I've seen this done before, say for example, there will be an encounter presented to players by the GM, and then the players proceed to then like bulldoze their way through the encounter. They absolutely wipe it clean off the map in such ferocity and in such speed that sometimes the GM then feels sort of a little bit trigger happy to then throw in another encounter directly afterwards, perhaps, which again I think can feel a little cheap, and it can feel like when it comes out of nowhere and there's no logic to it, like you were saying before, Nico, then that feels cheap, and then I feel like I'm being I don't know, because
it's kind of heavy-handed in a way, isn't it? To just be like,
yeah,
well, you've done it, but now because it wasn't challenging enough, here's another thing, and it's like, okay, well, yeah, because I felt it definitely like in Mir again, like they like discovered where the bad guy was, and they immediately went home, picked up an army, moved up there immediately, and they killed him. And I was like, okay, well, that's the end of that arc. You know, it was just done. Like they killed him, and like the threat was dealt with, and I was like, okay, well, cool. Like, you know, and it can be a real spanner in the works as a GM to be like, well, that was like 2 to 3 good sessions worth of like bad guy, and now he's dead, and all his boys are dead. But like they had figured it out, and like they lured him into a fight, and they defeated him fair and square. And I didn't want to be like I'll often have the bad guys try to run if they're important, for example, and like that can be trickier in Istov too, because there's lots of like shame around running away from a battle. But even so, like most bad guys aren't idiots, and they want to like live another day. But crafty players will also like see that happening and will kill him before he gets away, and that's fine, I guess, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, understandable. Yeah, it is tricky. I mean, I can't think of any. I can't think of any occasion where, if ham-handed and if handled incorrectly, like it could add anything, unless you're just going for a grind kind of game, or like a um like a dungeon crawl, like you're just going from one fight to the next. Then you probably wouldn't even notice, would you? Because that's the type of game where you're presented with one encounter after the other, like it's a series of trials and challenges until you get to the boss, basically.
Yeah.
So in that kind of game, I think that would be fine. You probably wouldn't even notice it happening. But I think with more storytelling and tactics-based games, yeah,
Like,
then
what
it
if it
sticks
was
out.
like if it was Lore Keepers and you had this like big set piece planned, with like some like insane bad guy, and it was like this big thing, and then we like didn't go there, or like worked around it, or like figured out a way to like assassinate it before it happened, or like whatever it is, right? You figured some way around, and you had planned like 1/3 of the session to be this big encounter.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's the kind of, for me, the way it comes in, because like I try not to plan that way anymore, because I think like it's really dangerous for this reason.
It is.
Because like players who are crafty will figure out a way around those things. And you don't want to be like, no, you can't do that because I have, 34 minutes planned of you fighting this guy.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean, because I mean, you know me. I like to like have my set pieces, like
For sure. Yeah.
my climactic battles and things. So yeah, I suppose. I mean, I wouldn't stop you. Um, yeah, I don't think so. The only thing. No, I can't think of there being an occasion where I would try and force players into having to do an encounter a certain way. I'd be really happy if that happened. The example I was thinking of, it's the example I always come back to, is Martial Mist in the Nightmare Shrine, because there was this like terrifying, just absolutely just like I spent most of that session like building up to the fact you're in this terrifying extra dimensional prison, and then there's this guy at the end, and you just shit on him. You shit on him, and then that was it. And I was like, oh, okay. That was an interesting one. Although that said, making things happen, I had to try and take Barker's character out of that session, which wasn't very easy, because all of it that's a really good example, actually, because all of you guys were coming up with solutions that, artistically, with a bit of artistic license, probably could have worked. Like,
Yeah.
Drax was trying to cut the disintegrating power out of him and stuff, and I was like, no, it doesn't work.
Well, that's different. I guess that's different because that had to be a set outcome, because Barker had to leave the game, right? So we couldn't
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of those moments where you're like, that should work.
Yeah, but I suppose that's a little different to what we're talking about, but still. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I have anything further to put to that, other than reward clever thinking, I guess. I would be dismayed if I'd put all the effort in. And like with Game of Thrones, you send lots of ravens, don't you? And you do lots of political intrigue.
3/4 of the hour is like discussing meta, what to like put to pen in character.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lately.
Yep.
I love that.
Because now we're at the stage where like Chex's character is literally a claimant for the Iron Throne, like the best claimant. He's like a son. He's Rhaegar's son, and so he's got an amazing claim for the throne. We have the Golden Company with us. We've conquered the Stormlands, so like our power level is like way up there. We're like Lannister level powerful. And now recently we just got Dorne to join us, and so now we're above Lannister level powerful. And so like most of the sessions are us looking at this like amazing map that Nico has made, and like scratching our heads and going, but if we send 2,000 men in this place, and it's like, it's no longer really like a D&D game, because like my character hasn't been in a battle, or like hasn't rolled a dice using his abilities in like 6 or 7 sessions, I would say. Like, he hasn't been in physical danger in a very long time. That's how I want it. Like, I love that. But then there's other characters in that game who like are knights, and they want to be in there like killing people, like them physically. And then that's a different question, I guess. But like, that's actually something we could talk about, is like character roles, because it came up in Mir as well a little bit, of like, there does come a point where like certain characters no longer make sense in the game. I'm just going to segue into that because I want to talk about it.
Because I remember us having, I think it was something you posted into the group as well, that you play is Maegor, isn't it, in your Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
And you posted. No, that was it. You posted in the Facebook group. Why would your king ride into battle? What sense is there in sending, your sovereign into the front lines?
Yeah.
Roles, yeah.
People argued that, like, in history it would happen and whatever, but I also think, like, why? Like, you don't have to, like, those people, like, are sworn to do what you tell them. If they don't, you can kill them because you're the king. So, like, if they're like, "Oh, why isn't the king here?" Right, you're impaled, you're hanged, off you go. Anyone else got a problem? No, cool, off you go, back to the battle. So, like, the question, like, for me, it's like I want to be as far away from that battle as possible, and I want to keep Chex's character, who's the king, as far away from battles as possible as well. Although he's not as keen on that as I am. But for me, it's like the campaign ends if he dies. Like, there is no game, like, or if I die, I think it also might end. And so, like, we should keep those characters the fuck away from the front lines, But then you have other characters in the game, like Lionel plays a knight, who up until like 2 sessions ago didn't even have any land. Was just like a roaming hedge knight, who we met really early in the game, who was great and useful then. But now it's like, when we have like 28,000 troops at your command, like, what is one knight? What good is it?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It's different in Westeros, where, like, one knight is literally just another man. Like, in Lorekeepers, Marius is like almost a god, and so, like, he would make a big difference in a battle, or like, so would like Azarax, who's like a 10th level wizard or whatever. That'll make a huge difference in a battle, But, like, Lionel's character is just like a guy with a sword. He's pretty good with the sword, but he's not like a
he
god.
Can fight an army. Yeah, he can save the Seven Kingdoms on his own. Could he?
No, like, an arrow will kill him as quickly as it will kill anyone else.
He's a very proficient and loyal now hatchet man.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting that, like, given last session that you lauded him and forced him to marry Lady Catherine, that he now has these administrative duties and, like, loyalties to your character's son in the Stormlands. And so his, like, role as a hatchet man is even further diminished and insulated.
Yeah.
Have you found... Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say to Nico, as we're talking about this campaign, and Nico's the one that runs it, have you found that the way that you prepare for the Game of Thrones game has changed with the change of these character roles? Is it more... Yep. I'm guessing it must be more work now, but, like, is there a different approach?
I don't get to just, like, chill out and have a cigarette as my prep for this game. I have, like, a Google Doc that I work on for the fortnight, and it mainly contains, doesn't have, like, a scene 1 to 10 or something like that. It just has possible basic scenarios and locations and key dialogue for NPCs that they're likely to encounter at those places, being like lords and ladies or royalty. Usually they're not really interested in talking to people of a lower strata than that. And then I'll have, like, another bit with possible foes if it leads to that, likely to different locations they'll probably travel to, and my notes based on what foes against them plans are from last session to now. And, like, usually that plan informs what events the players hear about or get affected by as they're in the sandbox of, here's 20,000 troops and insane power. What do you humans do with it? And so far it's wielded it heavy-handedly and, like, give it out sparingly where it may prove profitable or solidify loyalty, which is pretty pragmatic and resonates with, I think, themes of Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire. So it sits well with me. But the prep for it definitely has changed from being just, like, a couple of scenes that I'm pretty certain are going to happen to, I have to predict what 2 really intelligent players whose characters have extreme agency will do after the intro to the game, and then me eventually saying, now what do you guys want to do? And yeah, so it's reactive. It's reactive, but with a whole lot of front-end prep for possibilities, and there's a lot of it that doesn't happen, or that just becomes a tad in a raven later next session that they hear about, or down the communication chain, which is good too. Like, I don't regret the stuff not used, because it all makes the world dynamic and happens without the player's intervention, maybe to their better, like to their benefit, or maybe to their detriment, and they'll hear about it or be confronted by it in the future, possibly, or not. Still good, better to have done it than not, because you can never be too. You can be too prepared. That's a whole nother bloody video. But yeah, in answer to your question, Rob, it has changed, and it's a lot more situational and front end.
Your prep is I don't know. I don't understand how you. I actually at some point I'm probably going to want to sit down and watch you prep Game of Thrones, or at least some game, Nico, because the way that you set out your prep is incredible. I had the good fortune, Nico showed me I think it was the Game of Thrones game notes, and the way you'd done it, and the way you'd sort of put all of the different potential outcomes, and where your dialogue was, the way it was laid out, everything you'd included. You could frame it. It was beautiful. It was a thing of wonder, and it was something that I personally know I will never be able to do. I don't have the mind for that kind of prep. So I honestly think at some point you should do some kind of tutorial where you show how you prep, Nico, because no, honestly, like, I'm not just saying it to blow smoke up at you. It's like, it must be the most useful notes I think I've ever seen, without it being like A, B, C, D. Like, it was just a list of potential things that might happen, you know?
Yeah, it's out of necessity rather than great craft. I can tell you that. It's more because it's two factors, because I love the game intensely, and I don't want to fail the players who've invested so much. And when they have such agency and power, I have to be prepared for as many possible outcomes as I can, because a lot of the time it comes down to the players' whims or personal desires rather than challenge, obstacle, or event, now more so than ever in the campaign. So that is just like what I have to prep to keep abreast of their cunning and power.
It's kind of like a world prep thing.
Cannot give too.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it seems to me like it's a world prep thing. Like, you know the world so well that, like, when I'm like, oh, and who's over here? You're like, oh, that's Lord Flimflam and his wife, blah, 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 and his first son, blah, blah, and he's over here doing this thing. And, like, it's never hesitation. You just, like, know it. Yeah, but, like, that's really, really useful, like, that inside-out knowledge, because that's how I'm able to run Iskloft. Is because, like, well, firstly, it's not the same, because, like, you can't Google to see if I'm correct about Iskloft, so it's way different, because it's all just up here. But, like, it's one of those things where, like, I can pretty much with confidence say this is where this person is and blah, 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 and that's happening here, you know? And, like, that kind of world prep where, like, know the setting is much more useful in, like, a reactive sort of style than, like, you don't really prep a session in the same way, I don't think. Like, towards maybe the middle of Mir, I guess, I was, like, doing less session prep and more, like, world prep. Like, what are the different NPCs doing and stuff like that, and way less, like, here's a scene kind of thing. Yeah, maybe that is a good video sometime to do, how you prep.
It would be incredible to see. One last thing about Game of Thrones, then, because we kind of like turned this into like a different topic, but I'm glad we have, because it's good stuff to talk about. In terms of Game of Thrones, Nico, do you think that there's, like, with all of that player agency and with that amount of power they have now, Game of Thrones, I always think of betrayals and crafty things that people manage to do to pull all the, like the Red Wedding, for instance, or like you know, it's a surprise and, like, betray and catch them off guard when they have that amount of power and agency.
Yeah, it's interesting because when they have so much like servants and power and ability to like to network and conduct their will, there's so much more scrutiny they can give, so much more stuff than, like, more conventional parties, because they have their finger on so many pulses and so many, like, servants and such.
I would say that Maegor is, like, unusually careful as well for a lord. Maegor is someone who has read.
It's like you're hammering that home as you just appeared from the top corner of the video to be like, by the way, if you're thinking, I'm careful.
But, like,
for sure, man.
You know, Maegor is a character who has read A Song of Ice and Fire and knows the kind of shit that goes on, and, like, he, like, is extremely careful when it comes to that stuff, and he, like, has carefully, like, orchestrated a personality of, like, terror around himself, and, like, has made examples of lots of people and stuff over the years, I guess, to try and mitigate the possibility of that happening. I still think it will happen, or should happen, or can happen at some stage. Because as we grow more powerful, it's only going to become more and more likely, I guess, you know. But it was like a situation where Varys came to speak with Maegor, dressed as like an old woman, and he was like, "Oh, I need to speak with you alone." And Maegor was like, "No fucking way! Am I like sitting alone in this room with this stranger, like this old woman?" I thought it was a faceless man or something, you know.
Jesus.
But I took the chance and it paid off. But like I was bricking it there because it's the kind of thing that will definitely happen, I think, and like you should be paranoid about it. And I don't like make those decisions lightly, which is like I guess testament to the game where like still at this level of power with like guards all around me and stuff, I still feel in danger most of the time, you know?
Yeah, that is a testament to the game. And also, yeah, when there are people like Faceless Man walking around the world, is anyone really safe? It's an interesting thought. Very interesting. Is there anything further that you guys wish to add on that topic or the one that we mentioned before?
Not
I think
for
I
me.
gave my thoughts on the challenge question.
Okay. Well, we've been talking about battles already, kind of. So let's just jump right in then. So, mass combat. We happen to be within the presence of someone who does mass combat. Well, both you do mass combat incredibly well, actually. But the question is that, well, we're just going to talk about it and mention some of our techniques and our methods, I suppose. Techniques and methods is basically the same thing. I don't know why I said that. What do you think is important? What do you think is the fundamental? What are the fundamental pillars of a successful mass combat in a tabletop role-playing game?
I'd say atmosphere is like the big one. So you can have a mass combat that's really just a small combat, but if you describe it as a mass combat, then it is a mass combat. Which is like the trick I learned from Nico, where like there's only like 10 people in the initiative list, like 5 of them are players, but through descriptions and like stuff like that, you make it seem like there's a massive battle going on. And that I think is like the easiest and most effective way to like make a battle seem like a battle. You're in the middle of a shield wall and there's dudes on every side of you, and like, oh, you hack down a guy, and as you do, you see another guy stab someone in the side of the head with a sword, and all over there's things happening. Every time a player does something, you describe something else happening nearby that they can see. That creates a sense of like a mass combat, even though really it's just a small encounter. What I did recently was included like layer effects. So I had like I think it was like on initiative 15 that all of the characters who were trying to climb this muddy hill had to make like a mud check. So if they failed it, they would fall prone. Because it was like they were trying to move uphill into a gate or like uphill towards a wall and stuff like that. So that was one thing. I had like initiative 20, I think I had like missiles raining down from the gate and everyone had to make a deck save and stuff like that. And that added like firstly like danger mechanically, but also like a feeling of danger, I think.
I was about to say the same thing, actually, and it's something that I've taken note of for the Lord of the Rings battles that I've been in your games, Lloyd. When I try and do big combats as well, I like having the saves against like an arrow volley or things like that. But also, it's the time where you can use your improvisation to flex your improvisation muscles in a sense, because the thing that I take away from mass combat when you're one person on the ground is that it's absolutely chaotic. It's insane. So every now and again in the initiative, you will say as someone's turn starting or something like that, or in between people's turn, that usually works. You just think of something that will be happening in a battle. Say, for instance, that there's a horse that's on fire, for example, and it's screaming, running across the battlefield. Make a dexterity save to move out of the way of it and stuff. Like really just basically just make it up as you go along, obviously.
Yeah, yep.
Which I really like. One thing that I've realized is actually quite genius about Roman and Viking mass combats in role-playing games, because I've experienced both in your games, is that it's quite cool that they both use shield walls, because that locks you in a position on a battlefield. And that in a way is an advantage, because then you can then easily use the smaller combat rules, because you are just facing the few people in front of you, rather than like you're a hero like hacking your way through like lines and lines of people. Do you know what I mean by that?
that's the struggle sometimes with Middle Earth, like particularly now and against the Shadow. Like we haven't played in a while, but like you guys are so powerful now and against the Shadow. You're like level 9 or 10, which is like Aragorn. You know, it's like so powerful. And so you can walk through a battle and just like, and it feels sometimes silly for me to like upscale the enemies. Like when you were able to kill orcs at level 1, why are they now a challenge at level 10? You know, like unless Sauron is like choosing to send better and better orcs at you, like a Skyrim, you know, and it's like that. That's a struggle for me because it's like I have to keep challenging you, but also it feels sometimes heavy-handed to be like, well, this is a level 10 orc who's got 70 hit points, and you know, and it's like that is a struggle for me. But I know what you mean because the formation stuff of Rome and of I guess history makes it really easy to centralize a battle and to keep it in one place. As opposed to like you've got an elven archer who's like running around and he's like nonstop shooting at people. And you've got a wizard who's like flying in the air and like, you know, it's like way easier when everyone is like standing in this like neat little square, and so are the bad guys, you know.
Absolutely. Nico, what do you have to say on this? Like, what would you say is your main focus on mass combats, and what do you like to explore whilst running them?
Depends what the player. Depends, damn it. But yeah, it does. Depends on the players. If they want like centralized combat, then you can do it that way. If they want to have their will exercised by legions of troops in front of them, then I think you are obliged to make it more than an environmental description and something that the players can actually engage with their rank or power or leadership or however, whatever system you want to use. And I do both, and they both have their like pros and cons, obviously. For mass combat, generally, I'd like Lloyd pretty much said like my thoughts on it. Yeah, having environmental effects come at the players. Spell-like effects, just take a spell. Like if you're talking about 5e, D&D 5e, take a spell and delete all the fluff from it and then say that it's a picture of boiling oil or a catapult that's landed or an insane guy who's swinging about at everyone or whatever it is, you know, for the challenge rating that you desire. And having those effects in around players that fight against foes that you outline and define to them, so that they're not just like Soldier 1, 2, 3 or Hobgoblin or whatever it may be. Like they have to be curious to the players in some manner or another, so the players engage with them, and then you describe the battle as it flows around them. And if there is any way that the players can influence the battle, then you want to provide encounters or prepare for possible encounters to that end. And to do those types of things, just watch Barker's and read Barker's Be a Better Battle Master, because that's what you do for those kind of more objective based during the battle scenes. He touches all the points pretty well in that, I think.
He does, yeah. It's a good book. One of my main takeaways from being in one of your see, all of them are very memorable to me, but one that I really liked that you ran, Nico, was in the Rome game. I think we were up against I can't remember now. Pompey's forces, maybe? Maybe.
Were we storming the lighthouse in Alexandria?
No, it was before that. I think it was my first session as Drusus. Essentially,
the siege of Massilia.
That's it, because the way that, and I thought it was really clever how you did it, is that the siege was very much like the template for how the session was going to work. So first encounter or moment of the battle was us approaching the wall and getting up the wall. Second part of the session was taking the wall, holding it. Third part of the session was going back down the other side of the wall and then seeing like a wall of cavalry and chariots coming towards us. Like, so in a sense, it is kind of like, if you think about it, it's sort of like the template of a traditional dungeon in a sense. And I don't want you to take that as like an insult, Nico.
No, it certainly is, because it's orders based. You're doing you're not there by your own free will exploring a dungeon. You're pushed into these encounters, so it is quite linear. Yeah, I get what you mean.
But and the realization that, you know, we've had our resources taxed as you would be in a battle. Like you've been spending ammunition, you've been throwing javelins, you've been being cut to pieces, like your HP is like in tatters, and then towards the end you then see a line of cavalry coming towards you, and that to me really sort of was a really immersive experience, because it was the grind. It was the fact that, yes, we've achieved this objective in the battle, but now we have to collect ourselves, because now the next moment is coming and it seems even more insurmountable than the last moment. So I think that's like a real well, it feels real, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, that can be a good part of it. I think like taxing resources and stuff, because often a mass combat is just an encounter, but it might be more interesting to like have the first set part of an encounter like be the first part of the mass combat and then keep going. And because by the end of a battle, I think you should be so exhausted and so dead, and you should have nothing left. And like that's not often the case in battles I've done, I think. Well, I mean, it is a damage wise, but like not resource wise. I think they still tend to have like abilities and stuff at the end. So it might be interesting to like do it in waves or like have different parts of the battle happen at different times and stuff. Interesting.
One thing I also like to do, and I've only really demonstrated it in recent times, just the once. I think it was the battle in Lawkeepers, session 9 or 10, I think it was. Yeah, Kilgannon. And I wanted to see what it would be like if two of you were in one location and two of you in the other. So it was Chad and Barker's character having to defend the weaker section of the wall, which meant they were in a different location. They were in a graveyard and having to fight and defend their position in the graveyard, whilst Lloyd and Locaris's character were nearer the gates, for example. I like using the cinematic hop technique in a battle, you know, with like, if you watch Helm's Deep, for example, you know, it jumps between the perspectives of Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas and Theoden, like, and then that gives you kind of like a really good bird's eye view of the whole battle happening, because you're just seeing different moments happen when you jump to different characters. I imagine that could be, I don't know if you have done that in Game of Thrones, but say, do you like command battles when you have like battle moments in Game of Thrones, or are you sat in your castle, Lloyd?
So at this stage with Game of Thrones, we actually use like a tabletop to like get the bird's eye view of like our troops, because there's so many of them that you couldn't like effectively, like it's battles of thousands, you know. And so that usual formula of like, oh, here's the center of the battle wouldn't work, because it doesn't matter what happens in this small part of the battle, because there's so many people that like you winning this small section is not going to win the battle, you know. And so we like, it's more like a tabletop, like you're looking down on it, it's tabletop simulator, and we like look down with different pieces and stuff and like move them around the place here and there. And like then we have like each unit of like 200 swordsmen or whatever is equivalent to like one warrior stat block from the PHB or whatever, you know. And then we have like cavalry, and that's 200 knights or whatever, and they're equivalent to like a knight, you know. And so like it's like there's like maybe 20 people in the initiative, but like there are really like 5,000 or 6,000, and it works pretty well. It's like quick enough considering how much is happening, and it lets us like generally we'll each take like a wing of the battle or something, or like a flank or something like that. So like I'll command one bit, and Chex will do another, and Dan another, and Lionel the other, you know, and we'll all kind of command different bits.
And how are resolutions made then if you're using tabletop then to Nico's actually just said he's going to bring it up to show us, so that would be pretty cool if you can screen share that. That would be great for the viewers to see. How is it? So how is it resolved then? Those
it's literally 5e, like a small combat. So like I'll command a unit of warriors, and that will be like one warrior stat block is that unit of warriors, and they'll come up against a unit of pikemen or whatever, and then we'll like, you know, fight those out or whatever. And you can move different people around, and we'll often like bring cavalry into flank and archers and stuff like that. But really, it's like it's a small scale battle that's been blown up to be huge, kind of thing.
That's a really smart way of doing it.
Yeah, pretty well.
I was in a, and this is a while ago, normal D&D. It was back in when we ran the main realm setting that was my shared setting with my friends. We actually had a battle where our characters basically fought an army, but that was when we were using a grid. And I tell you what, it was one of the most miserable experiences of my entire life. It was so dull. And I thought to myself, never again will I involve myself in this kind of. It was my friend who ran it, and to be fair to him, like he gave it a good shot. Like he wanted us to have that feeling of a few heroes standing against 1,000. You know what I mean? But by the end, were like, oh my god, like we were there basically all night just doing this one thing, fighting one person after the next.
Yeah, that's kiddo. That's maybe not the best way to do it.
No, especially
I find that it's really helpful though with the having a visual representation, because often it's like pretty tricky to keep it all in your head. Like if there's even in Isloff where combats are small, there still might be 200 or so people involved, like small for like a mass combat sort of thing. So there might be like 200 people involved. Like in the recent siege that we did in Mir, they brought like 200 and something, I guess, against an additional 200 and something, and that was hard for me to keep in my brain. And it's hard to know who's dying how quickly, and then it feels kind of like a bit narrative-y, and that can feel a bit wishy-washy. So I think it could be really useful to like have it in your mind and like literally see what's happening where and moving units around on a board and stuff like that. But then it requires like a lot more prep for the GM to set that up in advance. And also the thing is you don't always know who's going to be at the battle and where they're going to go from.
Sometimes you can't actually prep for the battle that you know is coming because you don't know what Machiavellian ploys the players will enact and like what like decisions that individual characters who might influence stuff happening will make against what your foes' designs are and what their reactions might be. Yeah, so it's like a lot of front end work, but you got to anticipate a lot too. I think like the virtual tabletop that we use is good because you can prep other tables and ready them for certain eventualities and other units like blank templates to bring in on the fly to alter, like we've done to some degree of success in previous sessions. But ultimately, you can't fully prepare without railroading players like into a situation, which I try not to do in Game of Thrones, but for when foes demand it, I guess. Really, that's about it's not through player mishap or forget me's that consequences occur to them now these days. It's more because of designs of foes. It's the only real way that you can challenge them. And I guess on the battlefield as well, like individual commanders microing their troops against each other, but directed in a meta way by the players, controlling it, kind of like more of a wargaming interlude into the role play session. Which if you can't do it quick, it's fucked. It's no good because you spend all night for one battle when you should be able to do more than one battle in a session.
For sure. And I think that's the best of both worlds, really, because as much as I love Theatre of the Mind, sometimes, like you say, sometimes it is much better and quicker for you to have a visual representation. Imagine trying to command an army, but having to try and memorize where everyone is rather than just being able to look at where your forces are. That's an analogy, really, isn't it? Like,
it's probably representative of how like people would have commanded though. It's like they would have been far away from the battlefield and the guy would run up and be like, oh, our boys on the left flank are fucked. And you'd be like, okay, send another guy. Maybe it's more representative, but it's not very fun.
In front of you, wouldn't you? You'd have like your pieces and you'd have your stick to push things forward on the table. Those are always important to have.
We have two questions we might jump to in the chat real quick. So Jeff says, would you ever consider switching systems if a campaign scope changed radically? For example, why still use 5e in a campaign that becomes grand strategy, large scale game?
For this instance, because it's easy to track and transfer like previous knowledge of 5e into the macro of like 100 troops represented by one soldier with the 13-point block. It's just like using the easy transmutability of 5e to shift the scale. But not specifically to answer Jeff's question. I think definitely why not try a new system if it suits the needs of what you and your players are going for. If it's within your power, like why not? I think it's good to use several systems at once. Like I'll quite often use tables from Call of Cthulhu in D&D 5e or adventures from 5e, and then restat them out for Call of Cthulhu or Lamentations, whatever it might be. So I think that's a way to go. Unless the players don't want to, of course, that'd be about the only roadblock I could think of why you wouldn't shift to another system if the resource of the players called for it.
Yeah, I guess like but those are all quite similar systems. I wonder like if you switch from 5e to Fate or something, because it's so different, or like 5e to like Warhammer, which is not even an RPG system, but would potentially work for the kind of game that we play now. We could just do free-form role play in the scenes, and then use like not Warhammer, but like a tabletop game to, to like a war game to do the battles or whatever. It's potentially possible. I think it would be quite fiddly, and this game began as a 5e game, so I think it makes sense to stick with. And we figured out a pretty good system for like doing the battles and whatnot. But yeah.
Maybe to another roadblock they just consider the GM. Like overall, the GM needs to know the system. So I guess if the GM doesn't know or is not comfortable, then I guess I wouldn't suggest shifting like from one system to another. But if the players and the GM are capable and the situation calls for it, then yeah, if it can happen, why not? Yeah, that's a really good point to consider. That in further games where player agency is on such like a macro scale, having free form role play, play outside of battle, and mechanics of a war game with actual battle mechanics and resolutions in mind plays out the conflict. Could be pretty cool. And I wouldn't use like Fate for like from another system to go into Fate. I just wouldn't use a system and just have everyone role play and say that they do.
Yeah, agreed. And that looks great, by the way, the tabletop simulator you've just brought up.
Yeah, this is it. This is one of the battles that Lloyd prepared for the Lannisters, actually, and drew his forces down here, which if you can hover and then like give them all values, so all the players who are assigned to control them can look easily with their own mouse and like hovering over it and see how many men they've got, what condition they are in, and if they have any effects like dodge or entrenched or whatever it may be. I think I've got a Lloyd up here somewhere. Oh no, this is after the battle. Sorry, they've already captured the enemies and who are surrounded here in this prison with the white skull.
Look at the death.
I got the post battle, not the pre battle. I don't think there is a save of that. But this gives you an idea of what we use, and we just have a little ruler here to scale with what the units can move. So, we've got it worked out on little character sheets that all the players have, or unit sheets, I should say. So if a player can move whatever the scale is, 90 feet, then they'd be able to move 9 on this ruler. And it allows everyone to manipulate the figurine so they can say on their turn, right, I move this archer here and this infantry here to protect him, and then on my turn I'll move the cavalry around to try and flank them, or whatever, whatever it may be. But it helps us track it all and makes the characters' decisions in command have a bit more oomph, I reckon, than just like deciding arbitrarily as the GM what happens. It gives them real choice in how their men get cut down, I guess, or more of a choice.
One of the things about it is that like the characters from the campaign are in the battle like physically. So in this battle, we like lost one of our generals. He like died in a cavalry charge, which was devastating to us because he had like Mark Mandrake, and he had been like a really useful ally to us, and he had been commanding our Golden Company for a long time. And then he like I think he was shot down by an arrow actually. But he had like been leading the cavalry and he was charging around, and then he like died in the battle. We were devastated by it. We were like, oh my god. But those are the risks. Like you go to battle, anyone could die, even the general, which is pretty cool.
I think another video that we should do in the future, we should do a because I've never been in a session where you guys have used that before. So I would love us to do maybe like a mock battle so people can see how they can use Tabletop Simulator to simulate the kinds of games.
Totally could. Yeah.
Yep, that's a good idea.
Players to play different types of commanders, give everyone the values of their troops, and set the terrain in terms of a battle, and stress test those mechanics that we use or improve them.
Really, really cool. I would really enjoy that.
Okay, battle.
We're gonna do it. That's gonna be a thing. Thank you for showing us that, though, Nico.
No worries.
We have one more question about mass combat. We have to get through these questions, or else we're going to be here for 100 years. Quo asks, aren't critical hits the great leveler in mass combat, especially if there are many rolling combatants? So, kind of. I would say that it hasn't been as crushing as I would have thought. Sometimes it's pretty bad, but like, because we don't use the tables in the mass combat. Usually, this, Rob, but like myself and Nico will almost always use like some kind of critical hit table in our games. In the mass combat, that doesn't come up as much, and it can be devastating if a cavalry charge is a critical hit. Then you're going to probably wipe out a unit, or like things like that. But that's also representative of how combat would go. And if like you get a good charge on a unit, like they might break. I don't know if they're like.
I mean, even in a normal combat, and I say normal combat, but a smaller scale combat, and one of the games that we play in where the critical table is in play, even if you put it on a square on a grid, you have 9 potential opportunities of people surrounding you where that's going to be a critical hit anyway. So
Yeah.
I think that criticals are just lethal no matter what situation you're in.
Yeah, I think with the Quo's comment that I agree they are a leveler, and I think for my part anyway, that's intentional. I want that. Like even if you're level 10 barbarian can cut down 100 foes, there might be one who gets lucky and stabs a spear through its throat and kills it. And like if that goes away from a game, then I'm not interested as a GM of running fights on a micro level like that, where I'm just like narrating a player's success to back up the mechanics. I'd rather just have it all be as role play and be a much swifter experience for both parties and get on to better stuff than fighting.
That's kind of what I was saying about Against the Shadow as well, is that like I have to scale up the bad guys or else it's really just a narrative exercise where they just cut their way through baddies, you know? And so like recently, I say a couple of months ago was our last game, I think, but they were playing and they were fighting against Easterlings, and they hadn't really fought Easterlings before. And I feel like as far as the Forces of Darkness go, like Easterling Cataphracts are probably some of like the more elite units that exist in the Dark Lord's army. And so like they were pretty tough. But like again, like if they come up against, they're going through and they're fighting goblins or whatever, then it's very hard for me to like make goblins challenging and also keep immersion, because they wouldn't be a problem anymore for someone like Faroth, who's like a 10th level darkness slayer. It's like not really a concern anymore. But if you get 100 of them, then maybe it is.
To your credit, though, Lloyd, I've never felt that. I've always felt in danger in any fight you put in front of us, anyway. So I don't think you have too much to worry about on that front. But I absolutely understand your point. Should we just dive into the rest of the questions then and leave names for another time, or do you want?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yep. Let's go through Caius's extremely heavy corner.
Caius's corner. Let's do it. So, as always, before the Dice Cast begins, we ask for people to post questions in the Facebook group, Absolute Tabletop, if you have not joined that for some reason. And we have Caius's Corner, which is our fabled section, where he says, how important is good communication to you in a game? How often can you forgive internet or microphone problems? How fluent in English do you want your players, and do you prefer articulate players?
But this one really depends, because I can forgive basically infinite internet microphone problems if it's Caius, but that's because I know the.
Yeah, that's my answer too. I was about to say the exact same thing. If it's Chex and Caius we're talking about, the answer is infinitely. If it's anyone else, like it's 2018, fix your shit, ask Santa for a new headset and internet.
But it's like I know the value that like Caius brings to my game, and that like Chex does, for example, and they have frequent issues. And for me, that's like annoying, but it's never like a deal breaker. And I'll always invite them to games because I know it's heavily outweighed by the value they bring to the game. Like 1d4 times per game, Caius will like disconnect, but also like 20d20 times per game, he will bring out a gem or sing a poem or something. And it's like, okay, well, there's no question that it's worth it to me, that like trade off.
100%. I completely agree. And also, if you're friends, I mean, I'm not, if you're friends with people, don't just kick your friends out of a group just because they have like microphone issues at some point. But also at the same time, do fix your shit.
How fluent in English? That's a tricky one, because I think I want them very fluent so that I can like
describe properly.
Exactly, and like say what I want to say and not have to not dumb it down, but like simplify it so that everyone can understand. And do I prefer articulate players? Absolutely. And I think that like articulation and being able to say what you mean is like really important skill as a role player.
Yeah, and it comes with time, like, because some people kind of can overthink what they want to say, for example, and then blurt something out that they don't mean. And yeah, it can be a pain sometimes, but yeah, with practice, everyone gets there eventually. Maybe some people don't but don't play with them. That sounds awful. But anyway, no. Good. We've got even more questions from Kaiser's Corner, which is, how experimental are you with new ideas and techniques? Do you stick to a tried and tested formula or experiment with new devices? And if a device doesn't work or a player doesn't get it, do you persevere or move on?
Yeah, I do. Some of my greatest failures of games have been experimentation, gone awry. I think that's a good point. I'm not overly experimental by any means. I think more often than not, I'm cut copy and predictable to the people that I play with. But I wouldn't say that I'm adverse to experimenting. And I would definitely encourage people to do it for sure.
I tried it this shield wall thing in the mirror battle that unfortunately didn't get recorded, but where if you're in the shield wall, then every at 20
yeah
20 and 10 of every turn initiative, there's a shield where the shield wall is pushing and you have to try and compete with theirs or whatever, but it didn't really work. It just became very bogged down, and I found it was quite it just slowed the combat down a lot. It didn't really add any excitement. It just added more mechanics, which wasn't very fun. But I tried it, and I probably will try it again, having improved it or changed it or whatever. I would say that sort of stuff definitely I will try.
I think sticking to a formula isn't a weakness, though. I will point out, because the template is there, but the game will always be 100% different each time you play. It's that familiar standing that when you play with people that you play with people that you like because you like the kinds of games that are generated from that formula. Doesn't mean that every session is going to be 100% different, but you're still falling back on the things that everyone is familiar with. It makes it quicker, it makes it slicker. In terms of I don't know, I don't think I do particularly at all. I think the only thing that I really experiment with is the way that I either present information or do narrative kind of stuff. One session I spent basically explaining the history of my villain and a particular order of the setting, the Lawkeepers, and it did work, but I wouldn't do it every session because it was me doing quite a lot of talking. But so it is nice to try things, and it is nice to sort of give things a go and mix it up a little bit. But overall, I'd say that I stick to what I know, because I know that what I do generally serves my purposes, and hopefully serves the purposes of my players as well. But what else? He continues to say, sorry, Andrew Knapp once asked me to narrate what my character was thinking before making a death save in combat. I'm more comfortable sharing what others can see, hear, and smell of my character rather than inner thoughts. Unprepared, I fell flat. But by the time my next turn had come around again, I had more of an idea and could narrate the moment to my satisfaction. How many repeated chances do you allow for your players to learn?
That's a good question. I guess throwing it to a player is something that I do a lot. I'll often open a session with you are here, you're doing this, and then I'll just turn off my mic and expect them to pick it up. That's I know that is a pretty advanced technique. It's not the case that everyone can just fly with that. It's how a lot of us play in the AppTap group, certainly, and it's something that lots of GMs do, where they describe a place and a thing that you're doing, and then you pick it up from there. But I think that takes practice, How many chances do you give players? I don't know. I feel you got to keep at it.
Yeah, agreed. I think I'm the same. Yeah, it'll range from me just saying, how do you feel about this, or what do you think about this, to, like you say, turning your microphone off once you've completed your description and seeing who jumps on it. And then I make it really easy by saying to some people, how do you block this attack? How do you kill this thing? Because then you go from very specific bits of information that you want them to tell you, or just leaving it completely open. And I think the more specific, the quicker the response will be as well.
Yeah.
running a combat that you want to be swift, you say, how do you make this attack? How do you block this? How do you dodge that? Whereas if it's like more the narrative, more storytelling, role-playing part.
Yeah. And we talked before about like in combat, like information up front, then you wait to see if the GM asks you something, and then you like do your role play, right? Like you don't want to be like, I go to lift the hammer and I think about when I was a child. Like I don't want to know how you thought about, like, just tell me what the damage is so I can like get through this very long encounter, you know?
Yeah. Agreed on that. Yeah. What about you, Nico? Anything else to add to that? How many chances?
Oh, I wrote 1 or 2, the opposite of you guys. I took it like in the like how many times will you throw to a player and them not pick up the ball? I put myself in a situation, if I was playing with a new player and like we're running a session, I'm an hour in or so, and I've thrown to them twice and they've dropped. I'm not going to throw to them anymore. I'm not going to invite them back to the next session.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, no, I think that tracks with me as well. I think like I would try it a few times, but if it's not working, then I think Jeff is saying this in the chat right now. It's that like they don't gel with your style, and that's fine. Like they might want to play a different kind of game, but like I say, we have a pretty specific style that like is shared between us in various levels or whatever. But like, if you don't play in that style, then you just don't fit the game, right? Like,
it's not just on you either. It's not you just being a GM being picky. It's you thinking of other players as well. It's thinking about the other people that are involved. You've got to look out for them as well. And if someone is consistent,
yeah, it's funny you said that actually, because in the hypothetical, I imagined it was me at the table with my regular players and a new player. So I think if I was with all new players, I'd probably be way more.
Forgiving.
Whatever that word is. Yes.
Whatever that word is.
What is forgiveness?
There is no word for forgiveness in Australia.
Okay, well, that was Caius' corner. Thanks, Caius.
Thank you, Caius.
Always the best.
Yep, always great.
Always the best.
Caius would have actually been joining us for the Dyers cast today, but his internet failed, unfortunately. But we'll get him on his.
We gotta get him on. Why have we never got him on this?
Because technology. Internet,
technology.
Yeah. We do need a jingle for Caius' corner. Okay, so now we have Taylor. How do you breathe life and momentum back into a campaign that's had a long break? I feel like this is specifically targeted at me, and I feel attacked.
No, it's targeted at me. I feel attacked.
It is you. Yes.
What's she talking about? Speak plainly.
I thought she was talking about. Firstly, I thought she was talking about our 4th Age campaign, which has had 2 unfortunate no-goes. So like a month now without game. Then I thought she was talking about Against the Shadow, which has had like over a month but actually she's probably talking about lore keepers, vampires, and that sort of stuff, which has been a long time too.
There's a lot of candidates for how you play.
I've been to add some context. I've been super busy. I've been touring across the UK, so I've not been around to be able to play games, which has been mortifying to me. It's been really upsetting because I miss it greatly. But yeah, that is a really good question, and it's something that I'm going to have to deal with. I don't entirely know. I'm trusting in the fact that my players will be wanting to see a conclusion to all of this effort that we put into it.
I think actually that it's not that difficult. I think that if you say we're playing Vampire tomorrow, I actually think that if Nico said we're playing Rome in a week, that all of us would be like fucking deadly and we wouldn't miss a beat, right? Like, because so I don't like, people talk about momentum. There is a thing about momentum with games, I think, to some extent, but also I don't think it's as dramatic a thing as other people seem to think it is, because I think that if I said, I want to continue a game from 2 years ago, or a Star Wars game that fell apart or whatever it is, and like we got people together and it was starting to go, I think there wouldn't be much problem at all to like run the actual game. I think the momentum issue is like getting people back into the game itself, back into the swing of like playing it frequently and stuff. I think that's a bigger issue than actually like if you have a scheduled session and you start it, then everyone's in, I think,
I think there are a few practical elements that I think can fall short, and I think that's only natural because that is the ebb of time on one's brain, and that can be secondary NPCs and things like that you forget the names of, or certain locations that you're like, where were we when we did that, because it's been a few months since you've played. But all of that is can be remedied. I think you're right, actually, Lloyd. I think with the right bunch, you can be That should be our new house words with the right players. If you're with people you like,
Yeah. Yep. It depends, and play with your mates.
It depends and play with your mates.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's as big a deal as people make it out to be honest. There is like this feeling that like if a game doesn't happen a few times, that it's going to like no longer be a game. And I think that like I say, that's more of a scheduling and like not enthusiasm, but like I don't know what the right word is. But I think that once the game is actually happening, I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah. Fair. Anything to add to that, Nico?
Yeah, I would breathe life or momentum back into a long broken campaign through small moments with the characters, either with each other or like their favored or fond of NPCs, and try and tap on in that first initial session back what the characters to me have expressed most interest in the campaign, whether it be themselves or an element of the campaign or another character or like whatever the thing might be. Try and touch as many of those in that first session back as I could. But on top of that, like nothing to add, you guys had said it. If the game's already good, like momentum doesn't matter. We had like a 10-month break in our Game of Thrones campaign because life just happens and you just have to sort out schedules and things like that. But then I've had other games or campaigns where the break has been 2 weeks or 3, and then the campaign's fallen apart. So it's not, I don't think like that's so much a bigger factor as other things.
That's really good advice, Nico. The thing I know when we get around to jumping into Lore Keepers again, whenever that would be, is I need to make sure that all of the characters are brought back together as soon as possible, because that's the strength of that game, is the interaction between all of you, which was why the last session I thought was really difficult for me, because I was having to, and I know Nico has had to go through this, and you as well, Lloyd. Like when you've got characters that are split up. Like
the thing about a split game is you never get to eat the buttery popcorn,
You can't watch,
you never get to do it. You never get to sit back and watch the players like fight amongst themselves or talk amongst themselves.
NPCs.
Yep. So the ideal really is a session where you just like put something in front of them and then you like sit back and go, that's like the ideal. But also like sometimes it's necessary, and like players have different goals, and like for me and Lore Keepers, I have a really specific goal and I want to do that, and like I will be doing it. Like that's going to happen. So like I think that can be tricky too, because you don't want to be like, and you're back together, you've been teleported suddenly back in the same room, and it's like, okay, but
shit, that's what I was gonna do. Shit,
but I'm like, I'm leaving again to go find that fucking lich, so whatever it is, but like, that's tricky.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so another question by Taylor. All the questions today are by Taylor that aren't by Caius. Some players meticulously craft backstories that blend with the world. How do you bring in those elements and threads without it feeling heavy-handed? Are the games where the backstory doesn't matter? Every game that I run, your backstory doesn't matter, I would say, to be honest. I put very little stock in it. When like the game begins when it begins, and the stuff that comes before is for you. It's for you as a player. It's not going to come up, I don't think, that much in the games that I run, because they tend to be like, we start at a point and they go on from there. Unless it's like, I could see like maybe an Iscloff, if you were related to somebody, or like you had like family ties and stuff like that were important, or in the region or something like that, then maybe it would be important. But overall, I find it's good for like putting in my head who the character is. But after that point, I really give it very little thought as a GM. Yeah, maybe that makes me like a bad or selfish GM, but like,
no, I don't think
when people write like massive backstories, I'm just like, okay.
The thing I will say is that, one, I know I am someone that does use backstory to then explore later in the game, but I always like to ensure that if there is backstory, it's unresolved backstory, so there is something to contribute in the actual game. It comes back. Azarax's parents caused the endless night in my setting where the sun was blotted out, and that has now become full circle with that character. And that was on his decision. He decided to do that. So it wasn't, I didn't feel like I was forcing his backstory upon him again. He took that upon himself. Marius is a witch hunter. Like, the only thing about that is the fact
he killed a kid.
Yeah.
That's his big thing from the backstory. And you could so with that backstory, you could sum it up in a paragraph. Yeah. He was a witch hunter from a noble family. killed a child, left the Winchell dudes. That's like the end of Marius's backstory, and that's immediately after that the game begins. You know,
Yeah.
and I think that works pretty well. And so I would always prefer if a player handed me a backstory that was like 3 or 4 points, like literal like dots, you know, as opposed to like if you send me like several pages, I'm not going to read it, you know, almost unless it's like someone who I really trust and know will like put a lot of work into that backstory and like will write a really legitimate one that like I think is, or that I know will like contribute a lot to the game, you know.
Is also what that class is as well, because that's the class. It's basically the Witchhunters are basically renamed paladins, so that's always part of your character because that's what the character's class is.
Yeah,
I think with your games, the most backstory I've ever had. Yeah, it's only ever been. I know you don't like it, so I've only ever like thought about 1 or 2 things. Faralth, he was thrown into a crypt by his father to test his mettle against the shadow. Weirdly, and Vagnar. I said, but actually, there you go. That's I think one that works when you're
an outlaw.
An outlaw and it is Sklosh. That's your basically everyone's backstory is how you became an outlaw. But that could also be covered in 2 or 3 lines. You disgraced yourself in battle, or you did something or other. Like,
yeah, yep. Keep it short, I guess, and punchy would be my advice.
Okay.
I think backstory is pretty important. But like, yeah, I agree with Lloyd. Like, I don't need to hear how you're the long lost prince of some place and like the witch that cursed and everything all like that. But you as the player do need that to be as long or short as you want it to be to inform how your character plays. Like, I would rather a character with too much of a backstory that they just keep to themselves and informs how they play their character than like one with no like thought or not enough thought put into it all. Why is the character the way they are? Where did they come from? What like life-changing events have occurred to them which have led to them being up to here? And for me, when I write backstory, it's elaborate or short compared to like directly compared to how interested I am in that particular game. If the game or the interest post or whatever it is has enough for me, my backstory will be hardly anything. And if I feel that like that I need to inject my own character stuff to contribute to the overall game, like you mentioned, Rob, then I'd go that way. But yeah, backstory is totally important from the aspect of how like you play your character and like it might inform your decisions and things like that. But yeah, do you need to have an elaborate one that's cool for each character you play? No. And there should be more like considered than exciting or like elaborate.
I didn't think of that though, Nico, and I'm glad you mentioned that. That at least with a bit of backstory, you can have a bit of consistency as to how you play that character. I think that's cool. It holds you to the mark, then, doesn't it? Like it keeps you on the straight and narrow as to what that particular person is like. So that's a very fair point to make.
Yeah, I think a lot of characters in all sorts of stuff, not just role play, act more out of like what's happened to them, you know, more than say like faith or codes or morals and things like that in certain circumstances. Like those big events that shape someone's backstory are like really important to how they play. So yeah, from that angle, you should write it. You should do it.
Yep. I more mean like in relation to kind of what Taylor said, how do you work that stuff in as a GM? For me, like it's good that you have it for yourself, but like if you hand me pages and pages of stuff, like I'm probably not going to work that all in, you know. Like Dan has a pretty significant backstory in Against the Shadow, and it's coming in now in session 30. You know, it's like you know, like it'll come up maybe eventually, but only when it's relevant and only like when we're in your homeland or whatever else, you know. That kind of stuff, I guess, you know. But it's for you as a player more than for the GM, I think.
One last thing to consider, I think, as well, which is something that's really important that a lot of people forget all the time, and it makes me a little crazy, is if you put up, like, say you put up an interest post, or say, I'm going to run this game, you're starting at level 1, and then they say how they like were involved in like climactic battles and they fought like a king and shit like that, and it's like, how the fuck did you do that at level 1? You know, like you need to take into account what mechanically your character is capable of before spinning this yarn about what they've achieved, and then will never achieve the like in the actual game itself because they never get to that power level. Do you know what I mean? I've had that happen a few times. Players show up with Radlord backstories, but peon numbers a sheet.
For the Iscloff game that Nico's going to run, I put up a short backstory for my character, and it's like he grew up in this place. He killed one guy that had a big name in a battle one time, like shanked him basically, but killed him, and that made him more famous. And he like almost lost a hand, and that's like enough for me to go on, you know. And I think it's enough for Nico to go on as well, probably, you know.
Oh man, I want to be in that game so much.
Stop being a successful actor.
Marginally. Yeah. We need to talk about that. We'll talk about that off air. Hang on. Taylor has another question, which is if a player freezes or gets analysis paralysis, how does the GM respond? Do you wait, offer prompts, come back to them later? And what if it's during a round combat and the initiative stalls with one player every round?
Pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
Mine too, yes.
On the second round, I'd tell them, like, by the tone of my voice and the rapidity of my speech, I'd indicate pretty clear to them to, like, sort their shit out and, like, say it and, like, compensate for it next turn.
Yeah, and you know what?
I
Like,
run along by my voice and, like, what I'm trying to intimate to them without, like, stopping everyone else's flow of the game.
having been in combats run by both of you too, like there is a precedent set, like, and it keeps you on the ball. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying you either of you are nasty about it, but like you're very kind of to the point when it comes to like, what did you get? Like, you got to be ready with that information because you don't want to be the one that's dragging your feet on the ground. You know, like, and I don't think I do as a player, but I definitely. I mean, you guys know I've been involved with running games where there'll be an individual that really, really, really drags the story, or rather, does too much of the story and not enough of the numbers. I want the numbers.
Yeah.
Fucking.
Sometimes you need them just be direct and assertive, so you can prompt players too before their turn. Like, it's the one-eyed goblin up. Remember such and such. You're up next.
Yeah, that's a good
like
idea.
that.
Yeah.
Like, for the love of God, pre-roll your damage.
Yeah.
Like, pre-roll your attacks and damage. If you know what you're going to be doing, why wait till your turn? You know, like if you're starting a combat, you're standing against like opposite a bad guy. Yeah. And for the love of God, like roll your attacks, and then when your turn starts, I got a 17, got a 19. Did those hit? Yeah. Excellent. I did this much damage. Cool. Now I can
literally. We play online, and when we play online, we all, as part of the social contract, all agree that we're going to be 100% honest when it comes to rolling our die. You know, around the table, everyone sees what you're rolling, so I can guess. Yeah, understandable if you're going to wait till just before your turn or on your turn to roll your die. But when you're online, it doesn't matter because no one is only one person is going to see that result when you roll it, and that's you. So the way I do it, like in every game I'm in now, I always make sure that I pre-roll because I know that my maths isn't as fast as other people's who play. So I pre-roll to make sure I know what I'm doing. But then if something changes, like say for instance, the enemy that I'm going to go for is then gone, and then I'm not in range of anyone else or something, then I have to like think on my feet. But I've played for over 15, 16 years now of role-playing games. Like I'm quite good at doing it now. It's just that giving myself the head start is helpful. And it's helpful for everyone, I think.
Just like analysis paralysis when it comes to big decisions can be a thing. Like I definitely feel it in Game of Thrones often, where like we have, like Nico said, like unlimited nearly resources and like endless agency, and so that can be like tricky sometimes deciding like what you do with all that power, and all that agency. That could be hard, you know. But we spend a lot of time in those games figuring that out, and that's part of that game. And now, because it just has to be, because you can't make split decisions when you're talking about like thousands of troops and stuff like that, and decisions that will implement or like change the entire realm. And if you are like, we often play hierarchical games where like someone is in charge, and so like that person obviously has to do a lot more thinking and a lot more like decision making, and so that can be tricky. I will maybe offer suggestions if somebody is new to that, or if they're not new to it but they don't know all the information or whatever. I might say, oh, you could do this or you could do this, or if I feel they're taking too long, you know.
By that same notion, though, if someone else is that role and you're a player that does suffer from that quite a lot, it's quite helpful because then your leader will say, do this, and you do it. Like, I find that quite refreshing sometimes. I'm just like, okay, I'll just do this. Like, I'll you attack this person, I'll happily do it.
The downside of being that kind of player and not being in that role is that you quarterback the whole game, where you're in the chat going, "This is what you should do. You should do this." You blah blah blah. Like, that's my problem as a player, is that if I'm not,
you're a backseat general.
Yes, if I'm not making the decisions, then I'm in the chat going fucking, or I'm making suggestions all the time, because the decision making is what I enjoy the most.
Of course. Yeah. Anything further to add on that? No. I think we're.
Nope.
Do we have any? I forgot to bring the chat back up because I dropped briefly. Oh no, I've got it here.
No, lots of shit talk, no questions.
No, there's lots of shit talk, no questions. So, I guess that means that's it.
I think that's it.
Well, this was really fun. Although I'm a little bit like, I realized, because, and I don't want to go into this too much, but there are some people that play games and there are some people that just sit around and talk about games, and I'm really worried that I'm starting to become one of those people, because it's the second Dyer's Cast where I've not played a single game. So I don't have anything to add about
what are you bringing?
recent. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, yeah, well, once again, thank you very much for joining us, Nico. It's always fantastic to have you on the Dyer's Cast. I still want to bring you on for a historical special, because I really want to just talk to you about how you run your historical games, because that would just be on me. But also,
I just run them the same way as Lloyd does, so you just ask him to. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, like my craft is just his stolen. And
it's the other way around. I've stolen all your secrets, but I'm just louder about it, so then people think I invented it.
That's a good way of doing it. Yeah. We'll bring you on for that anyway, because I'd like us to do a historical special, and also do. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say a battle. Yeah, we got to do a battle too. I see in the chat that Lord Doty is keen for that. He'd be the one. Let's we'll get that sorted.
Yeah, well, we'll do that then. Like, there we go. That's it.
And hopefully Caius can be on next week. We'll see.
Let's try and get him on.
His internet together.
If he gets his internet together, fantastic. Well, Lloyd, is there any parting words that you want to say?
My channel, isn't it? I should do an outro. I never do outros. I just say bye until the hangout stops. So thanks for watching. If you did, we had a lot of nice people in the chat who were talking, which was nice. It's always nice to have that. I did read all of the things you said in the chat, even if we didn't talk about it necessarily.
Me too.
You guys should get Jeff on here. His thoughts are always so considered, and he's like got really concise answers that eloquently say what we shit talk for 10 minutes in one paragraph.
We had him on once, didn't we? I think it's about time we bring Jeff out. We'll get Jeff in on it as well. Yeah, for sure.
It's a timing issue most of the time, in that he works until 1:30 in the morning our time, so that's like
that's true.
Generally pretty tricky to bring him on.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for watching, and we'll all just say bye until the hangout stops, I guess.
Goodbye.